If you live in an old house, you've probably wondered what might be hidden under your floorboards or inside your walls. As the people we'll be looking at today can attest, it's simply amazing what you might find right under your nose. In this video, we'll be looking at 10 incredible discoveries that have been made by people who looked around their property and happened to find something unbelievable. 1. A masterpiece in the living room. It's hard to imagine you wouldn't know if you were holding on to almost a 500-year-old painting by one of the most famous painters of all time. But that's exactly what happened to Marty Kober of Tonawanda, New York. The U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel from outside of Buffalo had an unfinished painting of Jesus and Mary wrapped up and sitting behind his family's living room couch, a painting that experts now believe might be a lost painting by renowned Italian Renaissance artist Michelangelo. While Kober has had a hard time getting a definitive yes as to whether the work is indeed by Michelangelo, many art historians have been impressed by the work and say it is likely, but not certainly, by the great master artist. If that were the case, the work could be worth as much as $300 million. But how did it get to Kober's living room? According to an investigation done by art historian Antonio Forcellino, there is a letter in the Vatican Library that indicates the painting was painted in 1545 by Michelangelo for his friend Vittoria Colonna. From there, it landed in the hands of a German baroness who left it to one of her ladies-in-waiting, who ultimately became the sister-in-law of Kober's great-grandfather. And why was it wrapped up in a box in the living room? Mr. Kober's parents didn't want their kids bouncing tennis balls off it anymore. Only time will tell whether the painting is confirmed as a bona fide Michelangelo, but even Michelangelo experts confirm that it was, at the very least, done by someone in the artist's inner circle. An incredible find regardless. 2. A royal figurine in a little wooden box. Imagine this. You're in an attic and you see an unassuming wooden box. You open it, and inside there's what appears to be a toy soldier. Do you think to yourself, this could be worth over $5 million? Well, if that soldier figurine happens to be made out of hard stone by the House Fabergé for the Empress Alexandra in 1912, you might be right. An executor of an estate in Rhinebeck, New York happened on exactly such a treasure in the attic of George and Betty Davis. The figurine, a portrait of the Empress's loyal personal Cossack guard Nikolai Nikolaevich Pustinikov, was one of only 50 figurines known to have been carved by Fabergé. Details made out of exquisite materials like sapphires in the eyes of the figurines and gold braid trimming make the figure all the more valuable. The figure was acquired by Armand Hammer from the Soviet government's confiscated imperial treasures after the fall of the Romanovs. It was then bought by George Davis in 1934 for $2,250 and stayed in the Davis family until its rediscovery in 2013. At that point, it was sold at auction to Wartsky, a London-based jeweler, for $5.2 million. 3. A movie poster treasure trove. Of course, there are the works of great masters like Michelangelo and Fabergé that are guaranteed to be worth a bundle. But what if you happen to find an old poster in your walls? They might not be worth millions, but as a Canadian man found out in 2010, they can certainly be worth closer examination. Blair Pitre of Lacombe, Alberta, found 360 old movie posters while renovating his house. The house, it turned out, had been home to a local movie theater owner in the early days of motion pictures. So the artwork included posters for films starring Buster Keaton, Greta Garbo, and Bela Lugosi, among others. He sold about 40 of the posters at auction in Dallas and received after fees around $30,000. Pitre at the time said he'd be using the money to pay for the renovation he'd been doing. Not bad for a stash found between the floorboards. 4. A safe in the kitchen. Or maybe not. Speaking of things found between the floorboards, Mesa, Arizona found itself going viral in 2015 after a couple ostensibly found a safe under the island in their kitchen with a map marking Mesa with an X. Also in the safe were a little over $50,000 in cash, an old bottle of James E. Pepper bourbon, and a variety of mysterious papers that seemed to include some kind of code to crack. The story was posted on Reddit and the Chive and spread like wildfire across the internet. Unfortunately, the safe turned out to be something of a hoax, a marketing stunt for the Chive. But it's nice to dream. 5. A Van Gogh in the attic. Looking again to hidden masterpieces, in 2013, researchers confirmed that a previously unknown landscape painting by Vincent van Gogh had been found. What's unusual about this case, however, is that the painting was purchased by Norwegian industrialist Christian Nicolai Mustad sometime in the early 20th century as a Van Gogh, but Mustad was told by the French ambassador to Sweden that the painting was a fraud or incorrectly attributed and not indeed a Van Gogh. Mustad therefore banished the painting to his attic. In 1991, more than 2 decades after Mustad's death, his family brought the painting to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. At that time, the museum informed them it was not an original Van Gogh. Luckily for the family, they held on to the painting anyway. In 2013, with new technologies and noticing a description of the painting in a letter from Van Gogh to his brother Theo in 1888, and later the same painting listed among his brother Theo's collection of his works, the museum confirmed the authenticity of the work. Sunset at Montmartre became the first new full-size canvas painting by Van Gogh discovered since 1928. 6. Bones in the backyard. Sometimes exciting discoveries come not from your attic but from your land, as in the case of one family in Oskaloosa, Iowa. A man named John was out walking with his sons in the woods behind their property in 2012 when the family noticed what they thought was a ball peeking out of the creek. On further inspection, they discovered that the item was not in fact a ball, but rather a massive 4-foot-long femur. The landowner, being an archaeology enthusiast himself, recognized quickly that they had something special on their hands. The femur turned out not to be an isolated bone, but rather part of the fossilized skeleton of a mammoth from over 10,000 years ago. The family began working with local conservation boards, research universities, and other groups that could aid in studying the bones, and ultimately uncovered not 1, but 3 mammoth skeletons. Quite the find for a walk in the woods. 7. A well beneath the sofa. When it comes to uncovering something unusual, you might be excited to find ancient bones in your backyard. But how about a medieval well in your living room? Colin Steer, a retired civil servant from Plymouth, Devon in the UK, had always wondered about the sunken part of his living room floor that caused his sofa to dip, but hadn't been able to take the time to look while his kids were young and he was working. So when he retired, one of the first things he did was to finally explore the unusual depression under the couch. What he found was a surprise, to say the least. A 16th century well around 30 inches wide that contained a rudimentary sword. While Mr. Steer was excited about the well and has added lights to the 33-foot deep structure, his wife has been less than enthused. In an interview with The Telegraph, Mrs. Steer said, "I hate the well, but I suppose it is quite a feature. When we come to sell the house, I just hope it's not a white elephant in the room. Something to think about if you decide to go digging under your furniture." 8. Caravaggio uncovered by a leak. We all put off cleaning the house from time to time, but if there's anything that's been in your attic for over 100 years, you might want to take a closer look at it. After all, you might find a lost painting by yet another master painter. In this case, the painting, a second version of Judith and Holofernes by the Italian master painter Caravaggio, was discovered by the owners of a house in Toulouse, France when they were investigating a leak in their attic. First discovered in 2014, the painting has been verified by a host of experts and was sold at auction in 2019 to art collector and hedge fund manager J. Tomlinson Hill. The painting is expected to be displayed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, where Hill is a board member. Though the exact amount paid for the painting has been kept private, the painting's estimated value was around $170 million. One more reason to finally get around to fixing that leaky roof. 9. A violin that didn't go down with the ship. Few ships in history are quite as famous as the Titanic and its disastrous end. And thanks in no small part to James Cameron, few bands from 1912 are as remembered today as the band that played while the ocean liner sank to its watery grave. So it's perhaps no small surprise that when the violin of one of those musicians turned up in the attic in England in 2006, it was a pretty big deal. After years of work to confirm its authenticity, the violin of band leader Wallace Hartley was verified and went on public display in 2013. The violin had been gifted to Hartley, who died in the water after the Titanic sank, by his fiancée, and was returned to her in England when his body was found still clutching his violin. The violin was warped by the seawater, but otherwise remains in good shape, though not playable. It toured several Titanic museums in 2013 before being sold at auction for $1.7 million. 10. Treasure for a telephone company. Finally, number 10 on our list of incredible accidental finds is the Schroeder treasure dating back to the mid-14th century. This collection of coins, precious stones, and gold jewelry is considered one of the most valuable archaeological finds of the last century. The collection includes a crown believed to have belonged to Blanche of Valois, the first wife of Emperor Charles IV, and was found in Środoszlauska, Poland in 1985. The first pieces of it were found, believe it or not, when the town began building a local telephone exchange building. The first find didn't lead to much investigation, but when more treasure began turning up during nearby construction a few years later, authorities began to investigate. Today, they believe it was treasure that King Charles IV of the House of Luxembourg pawned to the banker Moshe in his pursuits of funds to support his claim to the title of King of the Romans. Ultimately, thousands of silver coins, about 40 gold coins, rings, gold pendants, a gold clasp, and the crown were discovered, a collection almost impossible to value given the rarity of such items, but estimated at between $50 and $100 million. So, next time you go to pour a concrete foundation, don't forget to take a look around at what might be hidden just beneath the soil. And those are the 10 most amazing discoveries made in old houses and underground. Sound off in the comments to let us know what you think you might find in your area if you did a little digging. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel for more interesting facts like these.